Thanks, Saj. Linda is from Southwest NRM. She's leading one of the NBS projects as part of the broad nature-led resilience program that we're managing out of NRM Regions Australia. And from our first meeting at the COP, we heard a couple of flood presentations. So now we're pivoting a little bit to hear about a different hazard, so particularly looking at fire, and obviously getting some perspective from the opposite coastline than we heard last time. So Linda, I'll hand over to you, and hopefully the share screen and those things will work, but we'll take a minute to get that figured out if we need to.
Okay, thanks, Beck. And I'll also ask you just to just feel free to butt in and give me a wrap up if I'm sort of taking too long or whatever, okay?
Will do.
All right, let's see if we can get this sharing. Let's see.
We can see your we can see your slide. That's perfect.
Right. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, welcome everyone. My name's Linda Metz. I am the Sustainability and Environment Lead at Southwest NRM. I come from a background of being an ecologist. So I've been a restoration ecologist for many years and have worked in a range of, I guess, different industries and landscapes, but really probably predominantly on the west coast and within the southwest of WA. So this is a great opportunity to do this project because it's a really pertinent risk. It's something that is very topical. Everyone loves to talk, fire. And here in WA, we went through a period of having some quite significant changes to some of our planning legislation around bushfire-prone areas. And I guess this is a really interesting project to talk about, maybe taking a novel approach to and a nature-based solution to bushfire risk management. So I'll just tick us through. So I guess the disaster and adaptation challenge for us is around managing fire risk. So we have increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires are likely because of climate change, and over 90% of WA is bushfire prone, and that's particularly the case in the southwest, where we have still quite a bit of forest cover, and certainly we have very high levels of endemism as well. And so there's a real challenge for us around managing fuels and bushfire risk, but without really diminishing our biodiversity values, which are quite integral to the southwest. So the impacts that some of this sort of increased fire frequency can have will be an immediate loss on biodiversity, reduced carbon sequestration, and obviously economic and social disruption. And I guess one of those real issues around that tension between bushfire and biodiversity is that it's typically sort of seen that an optimal bushfire situation in terms of being defensible and reducing your risk is to remove all the woody vegetation. But of course that has a fairly negative impact on things like biodiversity. So that's one of the things that this project's trying to, I guess, challenge and investigate. And we also know that we have, really traditional, well-established fire mitigation measures. So things like fire breaks have been around for a long time. They're often seen as a bit of a panacea, but they have their limitations. And we know that, again, that kind of concept of just removing all the vegetation, putting in massive fire breaks, is going to have ultimately a deleterious effect on things like carbon sequestration, biodiversity, which are all the things that we need to sustain a positive ecosystem. So there's a tension there. Next. So just a little bit about what are living firebreaks, because some of you might think, what? That sounds so weird. So typically firebreaks, as we know them, are areas that are completely denuded of vegetation. So typically you're asked to install a fire break which is down to mineral earth around the perimeter of your property. Each local government deals with this a bit different, and each state and territory probably. Here in the southwest, it's typically 3 metres wide, 4 metres high, and in some cases, some local governments have extended that out to 8 metres. So on a residential, still even on a rural or semi-rural, urban, peri-urban environment, you can be asked to install very wide fire breaks to try and reduce that risk. The problem with that though is that obviously great, you might have mitigated a risk, but you've lost all your biodiversity, you've lost your shade, your shelter, pollinators, all those ancillary co-benefits. So living fire breaks, the concept here is that you're installing strategically in the landscape blocks or strips of low flammability plants, which in theory, as the fire front moves through, will be caught up and will break up the fire and reduce the fire intensity. So that's the aim, is to slow or stop the fire spread, reduce the ember attack and block radiant heat. And of course, as I mentioned, there's those co-benefits that we're hoping to see by installing that right kind of combination, that we'll still be able to support biodiversity. We will have carbon storage because you'll still be able to retain woody vegetation in the landscape, and you'll have improved landholder resilience. So that's ultimately one of the big gains here, is that if this process works, you're actually keeping people in their homes, on their properties, on their farms for longer. So just what activities are we specifically undertaking? So we've got a sort of multi-step for this project. It's actually going to initially start with doing fire modelling work, and that's really important to do. There has been some studies done predominantly on the East Coast. There has also been widespread installation of green fire breaks or living fire breaks internationally, so particularly China. China's installed many hundreds of thousands of hectares of green fire breaks with the intent of trying to mitigate this fire risk. But for us here in the southwest of WA, that's not really been trialled previously. There has been some work done on firewise gardens. So many of you, I'm sure, have been exposed and informed about that, and there's some very good knowledge around that. But what we really want to do now is move that outside of that sort of traditional garden style and look at it more in the farmed landscape and how that can impact on mitigating impacts around assets. So we want to keep, particularly, I guess, farmers, we want to keep rural communities able to persist within their regional and rural settings, and this is something that we're interested in talking about. So we need to understand how the breaks, what informs the breaks. And again, there's a bit of a trade-off scenario here between the biodiversity, the carbon, and the mitigation of the risk. So ultimately, our objective is to reduce risk. So we can't, and this is where the modelling comes in, we can't have a scenario where we're increasing biodiversity, but we're having a really negative impact by increasing risk to an unpalatable level. That's counterproductive for the objectives of this study. So there's definitely some work in the fire modelling. We are needing and will be doing work on biodiversity and carbon analysis. So we're interested to see what the sort of baseline biodiversity values are and carbon, and then whether we're contributing positively to that, and where that, again, that trade-off is, that cost benefit. There is going to be a trade-off for sure. It's where's the sweet spot? Where can all of those elements optimally coexist? Flammability traits of plants is a key consideration. That's a really driving force around the success of this. And I think also where it's uniquely different from what you see in the East Coast, because obviously our plant species over here are quite different. They perform differently. They have different morphological traits. There's some broad similarities, but there's also some unique differences. And again, we're mindful in WA, we Southwest WA particularly, we have got these high levels of endemism. So we sort of are interested in seeing how much we can retain that. There's also another really interesting discussion point around this, which is, and Sarah Hoyle and I have talked about this quite a lot, which is the use of non-native plants. So we know that anecdotally there's some perception that certain non-native species, particularly deciduous trees, can positively impact fire reduction or fire risk reduction, and that's to be tested. And we need to be mindful about things like the negative impacts of things like that, which is, you basically importing weeds everywhere and things that become environmental weeds. So these are considerations as well. So we are aiming to install up to 40 hectares of living firebreaks within 6 different sites within the different rainfall zones. So here in the Southwest and Southwest NRM, we sort of our geographical sort of operating area covers the high rainfall zone, medium and lower rainfall zones. And so we're hoping to sort of get some landscape analysis through different locations of those. We are also in co-design with landholders and emergency services. Okay. So in terms of the vision for success, what we're really hoping for is that we can have functional firebreaks that reduce bushfire risk and intensity, but that do have some measurable co-benefits. So whether that's biodiversity, soil health and carbon sequestration. We want to really engage community in having a positive perception around these novel approaches. We understand that fire in communities has a very inflammatory reputation. And so we want to sort of make sure that people are along for the journey in a really positive way and are really engaged in a positive way, because that is the only way this is going to be successful, really. It has to be something that even tiers of government and emergency services and community see that it can actually work. And so that's a real challenge for us. Also, adoption of traditional ecological knowledge in fire management as a tool. We know that, Noongar communities down here in the southwest of WA have had a long connection with cultural fire and cultural burning. We also know that they will have some really good insights into the flammability traits of some of the plant species, and we need to explore that because, again, that will help us, I think, refine that species list around flammability and inform those sort of discussions, and we hopefully get to see more, First Nations engagement in fire management. We know that that's actually something that they're quite keen on, and this may be another vehicle to help starting to inform that discussion. And we want this to be scalable and nature positive model. So that's another key criteria here, is that it has to be something that can be applicable across a variety of scales and localities, hopefully, as well. So just where are we now in terms of the work that we've done? So March to June. So at the moment, we've only just really obviously kicked off this project. So we're in the literature review and community engagement site selection sort of space. We're then going to be moving into doing the baseline monitoring, finalising some of the experimental design, but also the fire modelling. And then we'll start doing trial installation and some early evaluation, and also continuing to engage with landholders, researchers and traditional owners and agencies such as DBCA and DFES moving forward. So one of the key elements of this is around seeking advice and getting good collaboration, particularly with some of the long-term ecological monitoring tools that we're going to need, and being informed by some of those nature-based or climate disaster risk indicators, sharing our experiences with traditional ecological knowledge integration into the program. We're hoping for, support for policy alignment and adoption pathways. So this would be a real amazing outcome if we can sway policy. Policy is very rigid here in the southwest of WA around fire management. We can all appreciate it's probably very risk averse, and there's no issue with that. We understand why, but we also know that under a climate change scenario, we do need to be novel and apply these concepts of adaptive management to what we do. And the old ideology of just get rid of everything, get rid of all the bush, then you're safe, is not very sustainable, and we lose out in other ways, particularly in the farm landscape with shade, shelter, all those sorts of other co-benefits, and pollination. And obviously we're happy to be participating in a community of practice as well. So longer term outcomes, we want an evidence base to support that policy change and to encourage further funding for nature-based solutions. We want to build regional resilience through reduced risk and increased natural capital. We want to see a contribution to the National Impact Indicator Framework where we can, and we also want to establish South West NRM as a leader in climate adaptation innovation. That's it from me. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing, Linda.